Let's break down the top 5 reasons why the decriminalization of these drugs is a terrible idea.
Just reminding you that people on the right suck too.
Number 1, it hasn't worked anywhere else it's been tried. Now, some might claim we're following in the progressive footsteps of Portugal, which did undertake with much success a kind of decriminalization.
It's always funny when a drug warrior already knows they'll have to talk their way around something.
But that was also paired with stiff civil penalties, including drug confiscation, fines, and even hauling users in front of what's called a drug dissuasion commission, none of which is even remotely being considered here in BC.
And here's his first lie. There are no penalties, civil or criminal, for the personal possession and use of drugs in Portugal.
A more comparable example would be the U.S. state of Oregon.
In Oregon, on the other hand, you do have to pay a civil fine. He flipped them exactly around. Oregonians have to pay $100 for the first offense, and that increases with subsequent offenses. The money is to be used to pay for treatment and recovery services.
Where, following decriminalization 2 years ago, both fatal overdoses and rates of drug abuse have only gotten worse.
I have no idea what this guy thinks he's slinging, but it's way too early to have data about this since it only passed in 2020. That's not enough time to observe the long-term effect at the best of times. But even if you could show an increase, and you can't, considering that these are also the COVID years, where depression rates dramatically rose and drug abuse and overdose rates along with it, then you have zero basis for your assertion. But now you see why he had to dismiss Portugal, because it has worked there. It's also worked in Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Germany. The reason why is that now there's no legal ramifications for addicts who want to seek help. Otherwise, they'd be admitting to a crime, which is a huge barrier for them. And that might be another reason the numbers would tick up immediately after. People who were afraid to come forward before, and therefore didn't show up in the statistics, now come forward. And that's not including the elephant in the room, the one incredibly significant time in history when it absolutely did work. Alcohol prohibition. Almost instantly, a situation where people died of bathtub gin and gangs shot each other with Tommy guns was eliminated entirely with the end of prohibition.
And let's not forget, here in British Columbia, we've already had a de facto state of decriminalization for years. If you've walked down the streets of Vancouver, here in Victoria, it's been clear for a while that there are no consequences and certainly no jail time for openly using these drugs. The result, skyrocketing crime, rampant homelessness, and now over 2,000 British Columbians dead from overdose every single year.
Citation needed, bucko. If you've walked down the streets is not a valid source. And you can see the same thing anywhere drugs are illegal, because prohibition doesn't work. In fact, there's an inverse correlation. The stricter the drug laws, the greater the overdose rate. This has been observed again and again and again.
Which brings us to point number 2, removing tools from police.
This is absolutely ridiculous. The reason for the law is that police don't have to waste resources going after petty drug users and can focus their efforts on the bigger problems. And his only evidence? He quotes a drug warrior cop. Thinking is not this guy's bailiwick.
Reason number 3. Decriminalization will make it easier for drug pushers and dealers to move their product.
Of all the drug warrior arguments, this is the one I understand the least. Making it so the drug users don't have to deal with violent criminals to get the product they're going to get anyway is bad somehow? What kind of sociopath do you need to be to even think that's a good argument?
One of the most shocking details about this decision is the massive amount of drugs they've actually decriminalized, allowing individuals to possess 2.5 grams of fentanyl, for example, despite the fact it takes just 2 milligrams to kill the average adult.
Lie, 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 lie! While the LD50 for humans isn't actually known, in rats, it's 2.91 milligrams per kilogram. The average person weighs 62 kilos, so that would translate to 180 milligrams. And because of our metabolism, the real answer would be much higher. At any rate, it's not enough to be a lethal dose of the legal form of the drug. The reason why illicit drug users overdose, as I've covered repeatedly, is not because they're taking crazy amounts because they just can't help themselves. It's because they're given fentanyl when they asked for heroin. Fentanyl can be hundreds of times more potent than heroin, so they'll take a dosage that would be appropriate for heroin, but it's fentanyl and they end up overdosing. All you need to prevent that is to let users be sure of the product they're getting, and that's never gonna happen as long as it's illegal. Also, note the same tactic of all drug warriors. Users only ever carry a single dose with them. However much you have is what you're going to take. And if it's more, then you must be a dealer. If you have a bag of, say, cough drops in your pocket, are you going to use them all at once the first time you cough? Or use one and sell the rest? Seriously, no one thinks of asking that?
This will allow drug pushers to rely on a dispersed network of dealers that can act with impunity from the law.
Yeah, wouldn't it be horrible if that started happening? Hey, moron! Did it never occur to you to ask why, after decades of the drug war, you still see all these stories of these big drug cartels moving millions of dollars worth of drugs all over the place? What is that but a failure of the policy? Whereas, again, as Prohibition showed, you can put all of them out of business completely by just doing one thing: legalizing all drugs.
And make it easier for them to prey on society's most vulnerable, including impressionable students, whether at university, college, or high school campuses.
This is another one I just shake my head at. All the drug war does is take all of the decisions about the manufacture, distribution, and sale of these drugs and put them in the hands of the criminal black market. And if they decide these drugs will be sold at high schools or on playgrounds, that's exactly where they'll be sold. Over a century of drugs being illegal, and over 50 years of the war on drugs have done nothing to alter that equation. If anything, it just keeps getting worse.
Reason number 4, destigmatization.
Wow, you mean we might actually have some empathy for our fellow humans going through something that they need help for? How horrible.
This despite the fact that we frequently, purposefully, and successfully increase stigma on other behaviors that we'd like to see less of as a society, such as drinking and driving and smoking cigarettes.
And yet, we don't make smoking illegal. We did make drinking illegal, and look what happened. Maybe, just maybe, stigmatizing mental illness is not the way to go.
By removing this stigma, we lower societal barriers for those who were on the fence about making that jump to these hard drugs in the first place.
Exactly how do you think addicts become addicts anyway? Have you done 5 minutes of research into this? And by the way, are you saying the only reason why you're not doing meth is the fact that it's illegal? Maybe you're the one who needs to seek help. Or do you think you're just oh so much better than all the other losers out there who need your daddy government to spank them if they do something wrong? We know that stigmatizing alcoholism doesn't solve the problem. We know that just the opposite is the case. Let them feel comfortable seeking help. Smoking did not end, liar, because it was stigmatized. It's because people were educated about its harms. And also, it was not made illegal. You could have come to all of this with just a few seconds of thinking, but you didn't, because you have a political agenda to push.
And making it less likely that others will feel the need to seek treatment at all.
Again, we see exactly the opposite. The fact that it's illegal and the fact that it's stigmatized makes it less likely people will seek treatment. Even when drugs aren't involved, the stigma over mental illness is a huge barrier.
And finally, reason number 5. This lays the groundwork for what the activists really want, so-called safe supply.
You mean like we have a safe supply of alcohol?
Is this really the message we want to send as a society? That it's okay to pump yourself full of deadly, debilitating drugs in perpetuity with no regard for yourself or anyone else around you?
Oh yeah, we have to send the right message. You know, I really wish that narcissistic, sociopathic, supercilious, misanthropic assholes like Aaron Gunn would take their messages, shove them into bottles, and hurl them into the sea.
Now, it's very possible that you're hearing many of these points for the first time because the media, the activists, and our politicians don't want you to hear the other side of the story.
Unbelievable! Gunn's side of the story is the only side of the story most people ever hear, which is why he can get away with lying the way he does. And trust me on this, I've been covering this issue on this channel from the very start. Remember when I showed the videos of actual police officers talking about these exact problems and concluding that the only way to stop the problem was to legalize drugs? Why does no one hear from them, but they hear all the time from drug warrior cops who just can't give up their power trip? No, it's one more example of someone faced with losing their political power and claiming that they're the ones who are oh so oppressed, and why will no one ever listen to their wonderful message of stigmatization and violence against their fellow humans? It makes me sick. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.